Case 623 by Danny Yu. Chapter 56. Later. They put him in a cage. He knows he deserves it. He knows he's done horrible stuff, that he's horrible, wrong. He knows he's stronger than them, but somehow still all he can feel is fear and sorry. He curls up in the corner and wishes he could disappear. Tony walked into the penthouse, feeling immediately more at ease as he made his way into the living room, breathing in the scent of Bruce's dinner. Smelled like butter chicken. Tony's stomach growled, somehow settling some of the unease already churning within him. This was home, and he was safe, the kids were safe, and things were all right, even if Rogers had screwed himself to hell and back. He walked through the door and stopped for a moment with a smile on his face, watching his children on their floor as they played. It was so rare to see them play. Far more often they'd be lost in books or hounding Bruce or him to let them take a part in some experiment or other, which only made it that more touching those few times when they acted like real children. Then he paused, blinked, and focused his eyes. And yeah, that was exactly what he thought he'd seen. He walked the rest of the way into the room, sat down between them. "Is that a doll prison?" he asked. "Did you put Bucky Bear in the doll prison?" Both kids looked up at him with wide eyes and heart-melting smiles, and fucking loved them. He easily allowed Jamie into his lap and wrapped his arm around Maria when she leaned into his side against his chest. Jamie nodded. Something somewhere in Tony's chest clenched. "Why is Bucky Bear in doll prison?" he asked. Maria nudged her head against his shoulder. Once she was sure she had his attention, she pointed at a different corner of the room, which, well, the hospital apparently, judging by the dolls and teddies sporting band-aids and bandages and actual drips. Tony swallowed around a sudden lump in his throat. "Did you guys watch the news again? I told you not to do that without an adult present. And Jocasta doesn't count." He gave a quick glance at the nearest camera. "Sorry, Joe." "We watched them with this," Jamie said. "He said the real Bucky Barnes hurt a lot of people, and that's why he's in jail now." Tony swallowed again, and suddenly all he could think of were all the times he'd seen either child in bed clutching that tattered old Bucky Bear to their chest. That teddy bear had been their protector and companion and playmate, the comfort that kept nightmares at bay even when Tony could not. To see that toy, more than a toy somehow, relegated to toy present. Suddenly that wasn't something Tony knew how to deal with. It didn't sit right with him. He knew the kids were playing in order to process what they'd learned, to experiment and figure it all out in their own minds. He'd spoken enough with their therapist to get that, but it still rubbed him wrong in so many ways. "Bucky Barnes is a bad guy," Maria said softly. Her wide dark eyes were sadder than Tony knew how to deal with. "Isn't he, Dad?" Tony bit his lip, pushed down the sudden flood of emotion, threatening to overcome him. In his mind's eye, he could still see the recordings of the Winter Soldier killing his parents, of the Winter Soldier in D.C., of the Winter Soldier smashing police officers in Budapest, collapsing the tunnel, fighting his way out of the JCTC building in Venice. For a moment, he was looking down the barrel of a gun again, feeling the kickback as the bullet connected with his gauntlet. "The gun," he reminded himself. "You don't blame the gun." "I don't know," he said at last. "I don't know the guy. I know the Howling Commandos thought the world of him, but they did it for Rogers as well, and he has definitely done some bad things of his own free will. I guess the thing about Barnes is..." He bit his lip, tried his best to think of an analogy that would cover all of this. "Okay, so Dummy has free will, right?" he said in the end. Both kids nodded and looked up at him intently, and his chest squeezed tight in the best possible way. "I hope so," Jamie eventually said, "or I'm going to start wondering if you like threatening me with a fire extinguisher." Maria let out a giggle. Tony ruffled Jamie's hair so fond it hurt. "So if Dummy went out and hurt a bunch of people, that would be wrong of him, right? He'd be a bad bot. We should do something about it." Maria nodded decisively, and Jamie joined her after a contemplative second. "But what if I went in and changed his code?" And even those few words made him shudder. The idea of anyone messing with Dummy's code, with any of his bot's code, made him want to get in the armor and repulsor someone. Made it so he had to hurt people, and give him a paintball gun. And then he went out and hurt people. Would Dummy be a bad bot? This time Jamie was the first to shake his head. "No," he said. It wouldn't be his fault. He'd still be a good brat. Whoever messed with his code would be the one who made him do it.
Well, Tony said at last, that's kind of what happened with Bucky Barnes. Some really bad people caught him, and they messed up his code so they could make him do whatever they wanted. They made him do a lot of bad stuff. But does that make him a bad person?
Both children shook their head quite quickly. Maria's eyes narrowed, though, as she looked up at him, her thick ponytail bobbing on the back of his head. So why is he in jail? She asked.
Tony let out a sharp breath. I guess because it's difficult to figure out what he did because of the code changes and what he just did.
Jamie looked up at him with big gray eyes, and Tony absently noted his angular face and cleft chin. You'll make sure they figure it out, won't you?
Tony sighed. Of course I will, he said. Trying to do the right thing for his kids could be a pain in the butt from time to time.
It was disgustingly easy to hack in and find the scans and transcripts of Barnes's journals. It was a different thing altogether to attempt to make sense of it. Half the first journal was a repeat of his service number, including his name and rank only toward the very end. After that, it was vague scenes from the 20s, and the things that weren't that were so horrible they turned on his stomach, and he couldn't stand it.
Joe, Tony said, shutting down the windows. Ask Dr. Jeff if he's a colleague who can go through this. Forward it to the legal department as well, and make sure they get in touch with the shrink Dr. Jeff recommends. I can't make heads or tails of this. Hopefully some of those people will tell me what's going on.
Yes, Anthony, Jocasta said, and may I say I feel you're doing a good thing.
Tony somehow managed to smile. Thanks, Joe. Means a lot. Bucky Bear had migrated out of the doll jail, Tony noticed the next day, but he was sitting on a shelf, untouched, not taken down to be cuddled or played with. He still couldn't say for sure just why it was that it bothered him so much. Was it really so disturbing to see his kids growing out of their toys? Sure, they were only 7, but most other kids their age would still be all about dolls and teddies and action figures. But Jamie and Maria weren't like that. Like Tony, their minds made them grow up that much faster. He'd come to terms with that, he thought. He realized a long time ago that the older the kids got, the better he'd be able to understand them, relate to them, the closer, in a sense, they'd get. He might miss them on his lap, and someday they'd realize they could read a story much faster themselves than he could read it to them. He'd come to terms with that, even if it did sometimes make him sort of wonder if maybe he should start looking for someone to have a new baby with, to feel that warm, soft weight in his arms again, even as he watched Jamie and Maria grow into the people they were meant to be. Either way, they were going to grow up. They were definitely going to grow out of Jamie's old stuffed toys.
So why the hell did it bother him so much? Tony was honestly kind of surprised it took him 2 weeks to get Peter to come back. Normally, Peter responded to every phone call, even when it ended with him saying that he had a school project or extracurriculars or a plan with his friends that meant it wouldn't work. But this time, he made himself so unavailable, Tony had half thought he'd have to show up in person, and the end result would be Peter resigning. 2 weeks, though, and Peter finally agreed to show back up. Tony made sure to book him an hour before he actually needed him to watch the kids, because Tony might be confused, but Peter had to be broken up as all hell about all this. When Peter did walk into the shop, he wore an uncharacteristically hangdog expression, barely even managing to look up and meet Tony's eyes. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Stark," he said before Tony had a chance to say anything. "I know what I did was stupid. I'm sorry if I got in the way of any of your plans. I couldn't let it go. Captain America has already done so much damage, and he was going to do so much more, and if there was anything at all I could do, I just couldn't stand by. I promise Aunt May took good care of J and M. She's real good with kids, and I told her I had a project I had to work on. I'm sorry I didn't get her authorized, Tony held up a hand. "Pete, stop. Just stop." He took a deep breath. "I'm sure your aunt is a wonderful woman. I'd trust her with my kids any day of the week. She raised you after all." He paused again, turned his chair fully to face Peter properly. "I was about to apologize to you, actually. I shielded Rogers and Natasha after S.H.I.E.L.D. fell. I thought it was for the best, that we would need them, when I should have learnt from what had already happened, and made sure they faced the consequences of their actions. I should have made sure you and others like you got justice. If anything, it's near my fault Rogers got the chance to step out of line again." Peter shook his head rapidly. "No, Mr. Stark," he said. "I get it. Second chances are important.
That's why I never said or did anything about either of them before now." He stopped, swallowed with a click. "I think you did the right thing, even if I don't like it. Just... Is Black Widow going to be in charge of everything now?" It was Tony's turn to shake his head. "No, I don't trust her. The UN doesn't trust her. I'm working to get Rhodey instated as the official leader of the Avengers. And if you think Natasha can manipulate him..." Peter gave the embarrassed end of a grin. "I'm glad to hear it, Mr. Stark." "I'm also going to recommend you get trained further," Tony said. "I need you to read up on the Accords and know what they are. I need you properly trained so you stay alive. I don't want you to sign yet, not unless you gotta. Not until you turn 18. But I need you to know them inside and out, because if you get in trouble, they might be your Hail Mary. I asked Vision, and he's willing to train with you and teach you the Accords both. How do you feel about that?" Tony hated it. Hated the idea of a kid being taught to fight, having to potentially involve himself in international politics. But it was what it was, and Peter had irrevocably proven that he was unable to stay out of even the big league fights when he felt he was doing what was right. Best make sure he was as well equipped as possible in every way there was. Peter's dark eyes widened, and the smile grew on his face. "Thanks, Mr. Stark, thank you so much. I thought you were going to fire me for leaving the kids with Aunt May and going to Germany, and..." "Don't do that again," Tony said. "Not the main thing. Like I said, I trust her. But I had to go in and retroactively authorize you as a temporary reserve Avenger for that one mission. And you'd have been in deep crap for going to Germany without a passport. I can't do that again if I want the Accords to hold water. You get that, kid." Peter took a moment, straightened his back, and somehow managed to look impossibly solemn. "I understand, Mr. Stark," he said. "And I understand if you don't want me seeing your kids anymore. Tony frowned. "What do you want about? Did I say anything to give you that impression? You're great with the kids. They love you. You're the closest thing they're ever going to get to having a big brother. Unless you're resigning, no way am I letting you go." Peter's smile was so honest and looked damn near angelic. "Thank you, Mr. Stark. They're really important to me, too. I really like spending time with them, and I don't know what I'd do if I couldn't anymore. I never got to be a big brother before, but now..." Tony grinned, got to his feet, and ruffled Peter's hair. "Glad to hear it, kid. Now, we've still got the better part of an hour. You're gonna help me with these spider suit upgrades. If you're gonna actually train, we need to get you better equipment." "Sure thing, Mr. Stark."